Good afternoon, Adam. How are you doing?
I'm not bad, mate. I have been playing a fucking lot of Dark Souls 3. That's the first swear word. Straight in the first sentence I've said, that's the first swear word.
You must have some pent-up anger ready to unleash.
Jesus Christ, some of the bosses in this fucking game, Greg. Some of the bosses in this game. Which is, let's start right there now, okay? I think, from what I understand, there are 2 optional bosses I haven't fought, but I've fought the rest of them, including another 4 or 5 optional. But lots of bosses, lots of optional bosses. I think the boss design is generally way better than Dark Souls 2. Let's get that out there right up the start, okay?
Okay.
I think that they've taken cues from Bloodborne. They've kind of they've made them so that like there's phases, which there always kind of was, but they're really distinct phases, and some of them, like in the way that in a Bloodborne boss would transform.
Yeah,
there's a bit of that here, not all the time. I just think the bosses in general are more creative in their design in Dark Souls 3.
Yeah, fair enough.
How's
the difficulty coming along?
Right, so I think the first 10 hours of this game are quite easy. Now, I say quite easy with the caveat of in a relevant term, as in compared to the other Souls games, okay? Because there is a point, and I won't name it, but there is a point where you can actually miss a essential boss and go off and fight another essential boss. Like, there is a point where it diverges, and I think went to the wrong one first. And that boss, like, is one of the Lords of Cinder. Okay, so one of the that's essentially the point you have to kill the Lords of Cinder to. I don't really want to go too deep on the story. Do you know what I mean?
That's fair enough.
But that's what you're essentially doing. You're making your way to kill the Lords of Cinder. And one of them. In fact, those boss battles are probably my favourites, apart from one of them which I hate and never want to play again because it nearly ruined. I nearly quit. It nearly ruined me.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. But one of them is, they're creative. Like the first one, I think it's the Abyss Watchers. That's not a spoiler, it's a name. I found really creative, and it felt different. It felt, I don't use this word very often. I feel it's an overused word. It felt quite epic in how it was sort of laid out, and interesting and different, and it made you think. And another one, one of the larger bosses, it's like if you can, there's a weapon in the area where the boss battle is that you have to pick up to use, because if you don't use it, I mean, there will be people who can do it without that, but it's specifically supposed to be played with that weapon for that area, which is kind of weird, but
it's a pretty weird concept. It sounds pretty interesting actually, because I think a lot of people who play Dark Souls will just use the one weapon, so I think being forced to use another one will be pretty interesting.
So one thing I think I want to talk about, and I don't want to harp on about bosses for too long, is that most of the bosses I think are terrific and quite memorable, but some of them I don't think are that great. And the reason that I think they're not great is because I feel like Dark Souls From Software Soulsborne bosses, whatever you want to call them, are generally designed that they're difficult because they hit hard and there's a lot going on, but generally speaking, you watch them, you learn what's going on, and you can beat most bosses, right?
Yep,
It's a lot of it is pattern recognition, I would say.
Yeah, it definitely is.
And once you get, say, pattern 1, which is like the first half of the battle down, you can get through that quite easily. Then it becomes, can I get through the second one, where usually they become more aggressive. Now, there are a few bosses in Dark Souls 3 that I don't feel, although I defeated them, I never feel like I learned what I did to defeat them. I would have lost 10 or 15, there are a couple actually that I reckon 20 plus deaths on, and by the time I beat them, it felt more luck than judgment. And that's not good.
Yeah, it does sound a bit iffy, to be quite honest.
There's three in I can think of them specifically, and all 3 of those are sort of not. One's very late game, and 2 are sort of mid to late game, and I never feel like what I did, the 25th time that I won, I never feel like that was any different really to the way I tackled it the 25 times before. I feel like perhaps just that time it didn't use attack X and Y on me as much.
Yeah.
I mean, there's one boss that can grab you, and it can grab you regardless of what you're doing, and I know people who I've spoken to who struggled like mad with that. For me, I killed that boss on the 3rd go, and the reason I did that, I think, is because for some reason it only tried to grab me twice, and whereas other people it's like constantly grabbing them. Now that's not pattern recognition. It's not pattern recognition. Sorry, that's just luck on my behalf.
Yeah, it sounds a bit weird because in previous Dark Souls games, I think a lot of the times I mean, a lot of us have got past just by going in, fighting, and learning what they're going to do, and almost the kind of the gestures or the movements they do before they attack, and that is pretty much how I think I've fought any Dark Souls boss. I don't know anyone else, but I feel like that should almost be like a central part now. But players are going to kind of feel I don't know. I was going to say disorientated, but it's not really the right word. But if they're winning by luck, then...
As I say, we've been talking for 5 minutes about bosses, but I do want to give a specific example that I won't show because it's late game, but I will describe what the problem is. So there's an attack. This boss can teleport, okay? And it tends to teleport from the front of you to behind you, and it will swing at you twice. And it does that every time. The only other thing it will do is teleport and do like a single downward strike, which is like a heavy attack, I guess. Now, that sort of teleport double swing is easily telegraphed because... Oh, sorry, there is a third option. It can teleport distance away from you, then it does a magic attack. But that one is easy to dodge. But the teleport double slash tends to be how it always starts that fight. Now, so the idea is that it will, it's teleported behind you. You fling the camera around, it's going to slash at you. So you roll again. You've evaded both attacks, can get a couple of cheeky sword slashes in, all right? Simple. I'm not describing anything unlike any Souls game. That's standard procedure.
Yeah,
Now, I faced that boss... I think 30 times, and I know other people have found it very challenging, okay? Now, the thing about it is I feel, and I know people who probably thrash the Japanese version or whatever will complain about me saying this, but I have to say it because it's my perspective. I feel like that teleport and double slash has a varied attack. And by that what I mean is when that initial slash comes... It should be easy to telegraph. It's like, right, teleport, it's appeared, slash, roll,
yeah,
and that's it, you've moved it, okay? Now, I've several times felt like that slash was a delayed slash. Now, whether that was my brain fucking up because I'm so many attempts at this or what, I don't know. I felt like that happened, and I'm almost to this point sure that happens. And that to me is like, well, how can I know which... the timing here, I should have this down. I've done this 25, 30 times. How come I can't? I don't know. It may be just the Souls magic. Its way it unsettled. I mean, by the time I finished that boss, I was actually shaking. Like it's fucking shaking with both joy I'd never had to fight it again and rage that it took me so long.
But then, do you think that's a good thing? Do you think that like Souls bosses should be that kind of troublesome almost?
Not that degree. That boss nearly broke me. I nearly put that down. Said, you know what? No, I'm not doing this anymore. It's
unfair.
There's more to that boss that I don't want to spoil, but there is more to that boss that made me angry than just that. But we've spent nearly 10 minutes talking about bosses. Let's talk about some other stuff. No, it's my fault. The bosses are a huge part of the Souls series. Story-wise, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave that for other people to digest.
Yeah, cool.
I think I have a handle on where this sits in the lore, and I think it's kind of cool. But I also think it does reuse other games' areas in certain ways. It's a very fan service heavy Souls game. There's characters that return. There are literally weapons that belong to characters from the other games in the series. I'm just being... If I sound strange, it's because I'm trying not to say names and places.
Very vague.
Yeah, there are nods in this game, I think, even to Demon's Souls, and I actually really appreciated that one. That's quite late
that's
on.
Very cool, yeah.
And I was like, that's pretty cool. If it's not that, it's coincidence. But in fact, there's several nods to all the games, I think. It feels like a greatest hits from Software Souls games.
Yeah, but that's the final one, so I think they're trying to just kind of put a nice close to it.
I think it has to be as well. I actually think it has to be. I think there will be more Souls games, whether they're Bloodborne or Demon's Souls. They revisit that, whatever they do. But I do think they need to maybe rest a little bit on the development, because at this point we are kind of venturing, for me, and this very much puts it in time. I'm playing on a patched PS4 version. I should say that right now. The most recent patch that's applied to this version of the game, and it needs work. I'm sorry to say. Hopefully by the time people are watching this in a month's time, it's been patched again. But at this stage, it needs work. And we're approaching kind of Telltale Games territory here, whereas like you keep putting out games, but you're not fixing your engine. And this, I hesitate to say this, but I do actually think this might be one of the worst technical performances From Software's games.
Really? That is some scathing comments. Jesus Christ.
The frame rate on the PlayStation 4 version is, I'm afraid to say, it's unacceptable. We also have Mick playing the Xbox One version. He said the same. It's unacceptably bad in places, and it never it starts off dodgy. In the middle, it gets okay a bit, and then as you get towards sort of mid to late game, it never goes away, and there's constant frame drops. It's not like it doesn't ruin your enjoyment, although occasionally it would drop frames in the middle of me rolling in the animation, and that messes everything up.
Is there anything specific that causes it to go even worse?
I thought at one point it was sort of lighting effects and flames, which is a problem when the game's based around that.
Because in Bloodborne there was a lot of like fire effects, and that's when it's really slowed down for me when I first played it. But I know some effects can be totally like heavy on it, and when they're trying to make a game look as good as Dark Souls, I mean it's really crisp. I suppose you can understand, but if it's unacceptable, then it really should be patched out. It
needs work very, very, very quickly. The load times are fine and stuff like that, and everything else is great, like the weapon arts we talked about in previous videos. And I would say, even with that, it's a sensational game. Like it's brilliant. You could argue it does rely a little bit on fan service at times. I mean, there are. I don't know if I'm going to say this. No. I'm gonna avoid saying anything that could be spoilery. But the weapon art stuff is interesting. I played around with lots of different classes. There's obviously a lot to do. New Game Plus, PvP stuff. Summoning. You can summon NPCs. There's an awful lot of NPCs with quest lines. There's covenants, and you can now switch covenants just by like applying an item. You haven't got to worry about you're going back and forth. There's a lot. In fact, they take a lot of busy work out of the game. And it does become challenging. I do think the early game is a bit easy, and I think that's a big problem because of Bloodborne. I think Bloodborne, being a horror Souls game, has, by the fact that you and I like platinumed that game, has made me a little bit unafraid of death. And a little bit unafraid of souls. So I went in and I seemed to just thrash through the early things, like kill bosses easily. And it was only really towards the latter part of the game that I started to struggle. And I was quite high level. I think by the time I finished it, I was level 85, 84, 85, which is quite a lot.
Yeah, it's pretty high for a first playthrough.
I say without doing, I think, 2 optional bosses, I was just under 30 hours, so it's a decent length. It's a very, very good game, a sensational game in places. For me personally, doesn't quite approach Bloodborne, and that's fine because that to me is probably one of my favourite games of all time. But this is damn fine all the same. If you like what we've just talked about, if you like us, go to patreon.com/GodIsAGeek. You can donate there, or support us rather, and help us make more like this. I do feel like we've barely touched on the game, but I don't really want to sit here for an hour talking about it because I will end up spoiling stuff by mistake.
And I think it's a good thing to have some things just you don't know about. You go in blind and you just see it for yourself.
Just know that it has technical performance issues on PS4 and Xbox One. PC version, I'm told, is a lot better. It runs very smoothly, but I haven't played that. I can't comment. But I would imagine, from what I've heard as well, it's much better. And again, it doesn't really destroy any immersion. It'll be one of those things where you're going through an area and you're rolling about, lots happening, and you just sort of go, oh, come on. You know what I mean? And again, the bosses, some people maybe will rinse them and not even find them difficult. I found a couple of the late game bosses very, very taxing. But that's Dark Souls 3, and I'm sure we will bring you more on this. There's going to be DLC and stuff, isn't there? They've already announced, and there'll be more, lots more. But for now, he's been Greg Hill at Greg Hill on Twitter. I've been Adam Cook at JeebusF on Twitter. And thanks for your time. Bye.
Should have backed the God is a Geek Patreon.